It's a double portion, Acharei-Kedoshim and Kedoshim. Kedoshim means holy. So we're going to talk about holiness today. What is it? Does it exist? Can we be holy? So there's a famous story from the Alter Rebbe's times, the times of the first kings. She was meant to give birth for a while already, and the baby just wasn't coming out. There's a baby right there. Anyway, and it was causing her pain and suffering. So this woman goes to the synagogue, to the residence of the Rebbe. That was a shul, actually, where the Rebbe would see people, the Alter Rebbe. And she walks inside, and she says, she sees a very venerable-looking sage sitting there, wrapped in a talis and tefillin. And she says, I'm looking for the Rebbe. Is there someone who can guide me? And the man says, I'm the Rebbe. What's your question? Maybe I can have months, and the baby's not coming out. I need a blessing, I need some help, I need some advice. The man wrapped in the talis and tefillin. Not a problem. She says, see, right now the shul is empty. There's no one here besides for us right now. She says, go around the bima. There's a bima, the center stage in the shul. Go around it 7 times and your baby will come out. And pray while you go around, pray to God. And she does that, and immediately she starts feeling the labor. She rushes to the hospital or to her midwife, and she gives birth. Miracle. 2 weeks later, or a few weeks later, she comes, the baby's happy and healthy, mom's happy and healthy. She comes back to thank the Rebbe, which is something that our Rebbe actually mentioned a few times, that oftentimes people ask for help and request blessings, but they don't remember afterwards to relay about the good news, or people are much faster to ask for help or relay bad news than they are for good news. Anyway, so she went back and she thanked the Rebbe. She goes inside and she makes an appointment this time. She doesn't rush into the shul, and she goes into the Rebbe's study, and he looks a little bit different. She's not sure what's going on, and she says, hey Rebbe, I came to thank you for your blessing. It worked. You gave me a blessing for the baby. And the Rebbe said, I don't remember doing that. I didn't do that. So he inquires a little bit more. She says, yeah, I came 2 weeks ago and told you my baby wasn't coming out. And what did I tell you? She said, you told me to go around the bima 7 times. So the Rebbe laughed. He says, oh, I know who it was. It was his chassid, Reb Shmuel Munkus. Reb Shmuel Munkus was a chassid of the Alter Rebbe, follower of the Alter Rebbe. He's a great man in his own right. But he wasn't a Rebbe. So the Rebbe called in the chassid, Reb Shmuel Munkus, and he was also known as a comical figure. He was known as the Rebbe's kind of comedian, but a holy comedian, if we can say that. And the court jester, the Rebbe's jester. But it wasn't light-headed gesturing, it was symbolically holy gesturing. So the Rebbe called him Reb Shmuel Munkus and says, why? What was the story of here? Why did you tell her to go around the bima 7 times? So he said, Rebbe, on the 3 high holidays, when the families, the shul says a yizkar, a prayer for the parents who have deceased, all the children leave the shul. At that time, we go around the bima 1 time. He says, we just do 1 little prayer, and all the kids leave the shul. He says, I figured if all the kids leave the shul for 1 time going around the bima, then the baby will definitely leave the shul and leave her mother, or its mother, after 7 times. That's a true story. That happened. The other question is, how did it happen? Who knows? But it was Reb Shmuel Munkus, a holy man. The Rebbe is a holy man, obviously. Reb Shmuel Munkus wasn't considered a Rebbe. He was considered an elevated Jew. But what is holiness? A Rebbe is considered a holy man. When you try to describe a Rebbe, the first description that comes to mind, holiness. Now, what is holiness? Is holiness an exaggerated kindness? Is it an exaggerated genius? Is it a great visionary, great leadership abilities? What is holiness? And why are we talking about this now? We're talking about this now because in this week's Torah portion, it tells us the very first words of the second Parasha, Kedoshim, is Kedoshim Tihiyu. Be holy. God says to the Jewish people, be holy. Seriously? What does that mean? He says, Kedoshim Tihiyu ki kadosh ani. Be holy because I am holy. So, what is holiness? I come to this understanding of the way I like to describe holiness in my years of study and research as transparency. Holiness, the way I see it, well, this is my personal opinion, I haven't read this anywhere, but it's aligned with the things that we do, right? It's like there's a sunlight, it's up in the sky, it's coming down into this world, and then coming into your home, you have sunlight in your room. If the window is clear and clean, it's transparent and it allows for the sunlight in to your home. If there are curtains, or if the window is dirty, or there's another blockage that prevents the sunlight from coming in, that's not transparency. So the holiness, the way I like to understand it, is there's a God and there's us and our interactions with the world, and whatever part of us doesn't block God's energy from coming into this world, that's holy. Whatever does block is the opposite of holiness. It's usually related to the ego, that which blocks God's light and energy and instructions and our mission from being fulfilled. But that's the basic idea. I would call it transparency. Holiness is somebody who sees the world from a completely different perspective, from God's perspective, not from our perspective. That's what holiness is. Now, can we get there? Can we be holy? That's a good question. So, the Al-Sheikh, famous biblical commentator, he says, interestingly, God knew that people would ask that question, and therefore, there's countless, maybe hundreds, maybe thousands of times in the Torah where God says to Moshe to teach something to the Jewish people. But it always says, Daber el bnei Yisrael, Daber el adas bnei Yisrael, speak to the congregation, speak to the Jewish people, and tell them. There's only one time in the whole Torah, in all 5 books of Moses, that God says, Daber el kol adat bnei Yisrael, speak to all, the whole congregation of the Jewish people, to every single Jew. You, Moshe, speak to every single Jew. This should be an unadulterated line of transmission from God to Moshe to the Jewish people, to every single one. And that is in this week's Torah portion, where God says, Kedoshim Tihiyu, you should be holy. So over here, the Al-Sheikh says, God knows that we will have that question, can we be holy? And God said, yes, you can be holy. Because Moshe told you, in God's name, to be holy. He commanded you. And with a commandment comes the power, comes the enabling. Shalom. So, what is holiness now? If we can really be holy, can we truly be transparent, completely transparent? And when somebody sees you, they just see God or godliness flowing through you, like we did by the Rebbe. Anybody who saw the Rebbe or anybody who studies the Rebbe, you know, there was no ego there. There was no one there aside from God's energy coming through him. It was obvious. There was no human characteristics that are natural to us, that are base. The instinctive, the base, the animalistic aspect of human didn't exist by the Rebbe. We didn't see it for sure. And that's what a Rebbe is. A Rebbe is a person who, or a tzaddik, a true holy person, a righteous person, is a person whose complete being is permeated with what God wants. Now, we can have levels of that, and Ramban, biblical commentator, talks about this, and Rashi also quotes a little helpful quote, and he says, what does holy mean? He says, Kadesh atzmecha b'mutar lach. He says, let's bring it down a notch. It doesn't mean you have to be completely transparent and everything you do is completely permeated with God. But Kadesh Atzmacha B'Mutalach means sanctify yourself where it is permissible, in areas that are permissible, things that are kosher, things that are forbidden according to the Jewish tradition. Then of course, let's stay away from them. But what about things that are permissible? And the Ramban quotes, he says, there's marital relations, there's food, there's other pleasures that that the Torah gives us a time and place for when it's permissible and okay to engage. But even then and there, says the Ramban, and Rashi quotes it, we should abstain from engaging our whole selves, from indulging in the permissible. I can't say I'm there. I can't say I practice everything I preach, but I try. But this morning I saw a piece of chocolate and I was about to reach for it. I thought to myself, oh man, I'm gonna go out here and talk about restraining from the permissible pleasures after eating chocolate. It ain't happening. So there, I did it. I did it once. I've done it once before, at least once before Shalom. But that's the idea. The idea is really to, when you have something that's permitted, it's okay to do it. The Ramban and Rashi tells us, be prushim, be separate. Separate yourself from indulging in the physical pleasures of the world, whatever they may be. The Torah calls us Mamlechet Kohanim V'Goy Kadosh. God actually calls us a holy nation. So he labeled us as holy nation and he charged us with being holy. So there are some enablers for us to be holy. There is a story. Actually, there's a question before the story. The question is, if you look in the Parasha of Kedoshim, then you see that all of the mitzvot, is about 10% of the 613 mitzvot, approximately, are in this week's Torah portion, Kedoshim. And they're not about ascending to spiritual heights. They're about being nice to your neighbors and about loving your fellow. They're about all kinds of mitzvahs that are between man to man and also between man and God, but they're not necessarily spiritual, of spiritual nature. So the question is, why is that considered holiness? And here's where the Rebbe talks about this and says, holiness doesn't mean to ascend on top of a mountain and meditate. Holiness means to live God in your day-to-day life, to bring God into your work, into your business, into your life in every way. I'll tell a story about that at the end, which is a fascinating story about South Korea. But for now, there's another story about holiness, a different kind of holiness. We have a few stories like this in the Chabad tradition. There's one, this story is in the Rimon of Hasidic tradition, that their Rebbe, Rimon of a Rebbe, is known as the Holy Man. I think he lives somewhere in Poland. And there's this song, he was a holy man, from Yitzchak Biton. He sang that about the Baal Shem Tov. He was a holy man, such a holy man. The Baal Shem Tov was the name he had. And one of the students of the Baal Shem Tov was the Rimon of a Rebbe, and there was one anti-Chassid, a misnagid, we could say, and he wanted to check out the Rimon of a Rebbe. So he goes during Slichos time, right before Rosh Hashanah, the week before Rosh Hashanah. We wake up early, 5 o'clock in the morning, we say special prayers, and he goes in the morning to see how the Rimon of a Rebbe does the Slichos, and how emphatic his prayers are. And he goes, and he's not there, the Rebbe's not there. So he asks the Chassidim, where is the Rebbe? So he said, I don't know, we don't know. He's probably in heaven, dealing with the angels. He's telling you idiots. What do you mean he's in heaven? He's probably sleeping. Like everybody's up at 5 o'clock in the morning. Comes the next day, he's still not there. So he asks again, where's your Rebbe? And he traveled far and wide to get to this place. He was upset that he couldn't see the Rebbe. And he says, oh, he's probably in heaven. She said, heaven? I'm not going to let this pass. So the next morning at 5 o'clock in the morning, he goes and he waits by the Rebbe's house at 4 o'clock in the morning. He goes early and he waits and he sees at 5 o'clock in the morning the door creaks open and this man walks out in a big, thick, heavy coat that looked like a farmer's coat, and he had an axe in his hand and he had some ropes and it was the Rimmen of a Rebbe. He was dressed up. He said, oh my gosh, he's gonna go kill somebody. He's gonna chop off someone's head with that axe and tie him up. What's he doing? He said, I'm gonna find out the truth about this Rebbe. And he goes and he follows him deep into the woods, from a distance, of course, from a safe distance. And he sees that Rimmen of Rebbe starts chopping wood. And he's chopping wood, little pieces of branches, and ties them up in bundles. And he brings it to this little hut in the middle of the woods where this elderly couple who were very, very old, couldn't do anything on their own. And the husband was laying sick in bed, and the wife just had she had some illness, whatever it was, or it was a young couple that had a baby and there was no husband there. There was some story like that where somebody needed help. And he goes ahead and he knocks on the door and he says, and he goes inside and he puts the fire in the fireplace, puts some hot water up in the tea kettle, and he warms up the house and then he leaves. And the man's watching this, says, this is the Rebbe I want to follow. And later on, so then this man becomes a Rimmen of a Chassid, and the Chassidim ask him afterwards, well, nu, tell me, what do you think, was the Rebbe really in heaven? And he says, much higher than heaven. To go to heaven is easy. To live here on earth in a holy way is much more difficult. To go to heaven is easy in many ways. To cop out, and this is really the first Parasha, Acharei-Mot, that we read this week, talks about the two sons of Aaron, Acharei-Mot Shnei Bnei Aaron, after the two sons of Aaron died, because they ascended to heaven. They wanted out of this world, and that wasn't considered a good thing, a positive thing. The sons of Aaron, it says that they offered strange fire, Asher lo tziva otam, that God didn't command them to. And rabbis tell us in that story, and then later in the Talmudic story, where Rabbi Akiva and 4 people went into, they say, the holy orchard of the Kabbalah, of the mystical worlds, and they wanted to be enveloped in the spiritual light of God. And that's what these two sons of Aaron did. They said, enough with the physical world, with the material world. We just want to be godly and holy in our souls. They tasted from the heavenly fire and they were consumed by it, and they wanted to be consumed by it, and they let themselves be consumed by it. And that was considered a sin, because going to heaven is so much easier than living a holy life. And it says that Rabbi Akiva, out of the 4 people, was the only one who wasn't scathed. One of them died, another one went crazy, another one left Judaism, of these 4 great rabbis. And Rabbi Akiva was the only one who nichnas b'shalom v'yatza b'shalom. This is funny, I just have to show you this. 2 birds, 2 ducks, Canadian geese, I think. Their heads underwater. And they're back up. Okay, God's beautiful world. So nichnas b'shalom v'yatza b'shalom. Rabbi Akiva, he entered in peace, and he into this world. The holy Kutsker Rebbe, the Rebbe of Kutsk, is known as to have a very sharp, holy tongue, and he said, God doesn't want holy angels. He says, Acharei-Kedoshim tiyuni. You should be men, humans of holiness, holy humans, not holy angels. God has enough angels up there. So what is holiness? The Ramban says, going back to the Ramban, it says, don't be extreme, don't extremely indulge in anything material or physical, and be separate in that way, because the word Kodesh means separate. And the Tosfot also talks about this and says, and the Rebbe quotes it and says, Kodesh comes from the word Kiddushin. The marriage between husband and wife is labeled Kodesh, Kiddushin. And what is this marriage ceremony what's the process of marriage in this holiness is this Kedoshim, is really a dedication. It's a person dedicating himself to another. It's a mutual dedication to each other. So he says, so too with God. When God tells us to be holy, he's saying, dedicate yourself to me. When you go to eat something, make a bracha, recite a blessing, and have in mind, have the intention that you're eating this to have energy to serve God, to do something good in this world, to do another mitzvah, to help another Jew. That's holy eating. When you do business, do it with integrity. When you run a business, run it with integrity. And here's the final story. An amazing Kiddush Hashem, sanctification of God's name, by a businessman who just did what he thought and does what he thinks is right. And I searched, after I heard this story from Rabbi Ashkenazi, Shneur Ashkenazi from Israel, I researched and I found quite a few more other stories from the same person. But here's the story. There was a situation with Israel and Israel. There's some confrontation with the Arabs. Unfortunately, Jewish people were killed in the process, and then the Israeli army retaliated. And long story short, the UN, naturally, wanted to condemn Israel about their interaction. And they needed 9 votes. This was about 10 years ago. He tells all the details, but about 9 years ago, they needed 9 votes to condemn Israel. There were enough people in the room, but the last vote that they needed, South Korea abstained. The council, the government member, whatever his seat is, abstained from voting against Israel. And so there were 8 votes, and they didn't approve or succeed in condemning Israel for that situation. Nobody knew why. 2 weeks later, great man, his name, Jewish businessman, his name is Saul Werdiger. You can look him up. He does some great things everywhere, and there's a lot of cool stories. Saul Werdiger gets a call from this council member, from this government official who abstained from South Korea. And he said, I want to talk to you, I want to meet with you. Sure. What do I have to do with politics? Not much, but let's talk. And he says, you know, that vote I abstained was because of you. He says, we've never met before. Tell me what happened. How did I inspire you? And he says, you have a big factory. Saul Werdiger's manufacturer of sports clothing. He's very much into the sports world. And he says, one of your workers in your massive factory is my daughter. In New York City, there's a factory. And she, ever since she started working, it was hard for her. She comes from South Korea, different language, different culture. But ever since she started working with you, she says, our home has transformed. How so? She says that it's a big, very successful business. And in America, time is money, everything's about the dollar. But she sees that and she relates with awe and admiration how at 1:30 every single day, no matter what's going on in the world, your factory shuts down and all the men go into a separate room and they pray. Or all the men or the women, whoever want to, they pray, they daven mincha, they daven the afternoon service, and they take a half-hour break. So it's like, and the work stops for a half hour to pray. So the values that she was inspired by, Shalom, were very impressed. And another thing, the 3 things she mentioned. She says, since you're in a very populated place in New York City, lots of people come from all over the world. You're known as a wealthy man. People come to collect money from you. So she says the whole day, the bell is ringing, and the doors are knocking, and people come from all over the world to ask, this one for an organization in Israel, this one for his bar mitzvah, in South America. This one for his kid who needs to get married. And everybody comes from with different stories. And you would imagine the first person that comes in, you give them something. But every single person you give generously and you treat them with deepest respect, like you couldn't wait to see them, like they're making your day. And finally, he says that my daughter tells me, and we know that on Shabbat, on your Jewish day of rest, you close the factory. He says it's unheard of. He says, if you're losing a day of work, you have many non-Jewish, and let them do the work and make more money, but you don't. Your business and my daughter's working in your business, in your factory, transformed our home, said the South Korean delegate. And that's why I abstained from voting against Israel, from condemning Israel, because you are a holy people. Holy. Here's another version of holiness where everyone can be holy in their own level. The Rebbe Rashab, the previous Rebbe's father, when he was 8 years old, he went out. There was a group of people, a group of Hasidim in his home, and he went out to get a drink. And he comes back. He went out a few minutes later. Comes back a few minutes later. I asked him, "Why are you getting so many drinks?" He says, "Because each time I go, I take only one sip. Because my father told me, don't finish the cup. Don't indulge in a good drink. Just take a little bit. Take as much as you really need. And later you'll take more if you need." He was 8 years old. Anyway, that's a level. But I think we all can identify with the idea that the holier we are, the less indulgent we are in our physical and material, the more connected, the more transparent we can be with God Almighty. That's the story. Have a great day. Thanks for joining and share.